Many of you that are parents will have maybe had your eyes opened, will have been shocked, will have been horrified, will be in fear, will be angry. There are a lot of emotions coming up with the movie Sound of Freedom. And so we're going to have a discussion on that today and hopefully give you some tips and some advice that will help you get through what is, it's a heavy time. It's a heavy time in our history to know that now we have the biggest slave trade ever within humanity's history on the go. And within that, it's mostly our children. So it is a very heavy subject, but it's one that we can no longer close our eyes to. So without further ado, let's get into it. Hello, everyone. You're listening to All Cards on the Table podcast with Claire and Sylvia, a show that talks about how men and women aren't so different from each other. We just don't speak the same language. We will dissect every topic and put an end to miscommunication. So, get ready to get uncomfortable. Hi, and welcome back. For those of you that don't know me, my name is Claire Attio.
Hi, everyone. This is Sylvia Jaira.
And it's a heavy topic this week, isn't it, Sylvia?
Yes, it's been a heavy week, past couple of weeks, dealing with everything. I think I'm happy that it's been such a light to it in that sense, because there's a lot of things that we can talk about, not just the movie itself. If you don't, I know that's not going to be played in many theaters around Europe and around the world. It's just started here in the US, but the fact that we're talking about it, that's huge, and that's the first step to getting in the right direction of stopping this insane trafficking of children, and like you said, slavery that's going on right now. So.
I think one of the biggest questions that kind of came up under my spectrum was, and it wasn't even a question, it was an indignation. It wasn't a question at all. It was an absolute indignation, because the trafficking of children is so free within Europe. And yet it's Europe that is not showing this movie. It's Europe that is refusing to screen this movie that will help inform parents how to safeguard their children, the things to look out for when they're about with their children. And that raises in me a huge indignation. And I did spend, and I know there will be other parents out there. I mean, I'm fortunate that my daughter's grown now, but once you're a mother, you're always a mother, whether they're your blood or not. And I think this is one of the things that we want to get across in this podcast is, mother, father, look out for children. Look out for, not just for children, look out for each other. Look out when you get that gut reaction as you're walking down the street and you see something out the corner of your eye across the road, and your whole stomach goes boom, and you get that nervous, something's not right. Cross the road, go and find out. Don't just keep walking. I think it's this, we have been so conditioned to mind our own business, to allow people, and it's interesting, isn't it? Because it's that phrase that my generation grew up with, because we'd come from a generation that was quite restrictive, that we wanted the freedom to be and to do as we wanted, and to let everybody else be and do what they wanted. But actually, we do have some moral boundaries that we need to put back in place that have seriously fallen to the wayside. And it's meaning now that it's those lack of moral boundaries have put our children, everybody's children, at risk.
Absolutely. For me, I can think of like two young kids that I wish I would have said something. At the time, I can say that I was too young to know the difference. So, but I knew that there was something wrong, and I knew that there was something that I should have said, at least in that moment, to my parents, because it just doesn't go as mothers, it also goes as a person, as a teenager. If you are seeing siblings, or I mean, not your friends, or you've heard of stories, it's best to speak up and say something. Uh, but for me, I was a young adult, and I could have helped. Uh, I didn't know back then what human trafficking was. I didn't know that it exists. I couldn't fathom the idea that children would be used for this. It just never, in a million years,
Mm-hmm.
would have thought of that, like that adults could hurt children that way
Mm-hmm.
and be sold that way. So when I would see this child, I didn't realize that that potentially could have been that scenario until it was too late.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and that was kind of the first time it came into my radar. And the second time, it was, and again, it wasn't. I don't. It was more of a in the spectrum of. I knew that there was too many people going in and out of a house where there was children, and the children shows always seemed off,
Mm-hmm.
and there was always adults, and I never questioned it because I just didn't think anything of it. But later I found out that, yeah, it was one of those houses that, uh, what's it called? They would do that. But I came years after that I learned about that. And I don't want to go too much detail because I don't want this podcast to be about that. But it was the fact that obviously by then I kind of knew already,
Mm-hmm.
but I didn't have all the knowledge. And now there is no excuse for anyone to say I didn't know any better, because it's all over the media. It's all over. Um, what's it called? There's a movie now that's bringing light to this. Like you said, the Son of Rain is bringing light to this of what's happening, and I think that is the main goal. So if you've seen something in the past and you didn't know was actually happening, okay, we didn't know any better, but now we know, and we should start doing something about it. And the thing, for me, it's like, if the government doesn't want us to know about it, it's because they prefer us blinded, so that we don't know. Just like I said, I didn't know that that was happening. I saw it happening, but I couldn't. My brain or my mind wasn't going there,
Mm-hmm.
or maybe I didn't want to go there. That idea of that going there was
I
just
think
too
that's a really key
horrific.
point to bring there, especially for parents, because if you're a loving, caring, compassionate parent who allow your mind to go to such a dark place,
Mm-hmm.
it fills you with horror, it fills you with terror, it brings in anxiety, and it makes you hyper vigilant and almost to the point of dysfunction within your own family. And that's why so many people don't go there.
Mm-hmm.
But the problem is us not going there is allowing this to continue. And as Sylvia said, governments are refusing to do anything about this. They
Mm-hmm.
are not getting behind this. And you have to ask the question why. And if you look at the statistics of the amount of children that are going missing, if you big organizations that are in quote unquote in brackets there to help the children, save the children, and thousands are just disappearing, and nobody is questioning where, why, how.
Right. And I mean, these organizations are not the organizations like the Underground Railroad Project, because I think they're doing a fantastic job. I've known about them since 2018, before the movie even came out, and I was doing some work in Guam with another organization because I was trying to get more into Cambodia. But those organizations are totally different from the ones that we're talking about.
Mm-hmm.
I'm talking about Homeland Security, that they've lost almost 5,000 children, migrant children. And if you go into your government of your Homeland Security Home Office, they've lost just as many migrant children. And my question is, why migrant children? Like, because no one will ask for them.
No.
Their parents have no voice.
Yeah.
The parents have no rights. They're so easy to be targeted. And I've noticed the research that I've done, that and the more that I get to know, and the more stories I hear, the common denominator here is they're all poor, impoverished families, low-income families, migrant families, the families that don't have the voice. No one will hear them. They're they I remember one lady saying that she was like, she was that a dog had more rights than her.
Yeah.
And they will find a puppy before they find her son. And that kind of stuck to my core when she said that, because I was like, okay.
Well, it's like a knife to the heart, isn't it? I want to repeat
was
that,
like,
because actually that's the first time I've heard that, and that's come from a woman that's lost her child, hasn't it?
yeah,
They will
at 7.
They will find a puppy before they find her son.
Yes. And this was in Spanish, of course, and I think I felt, I didn't know at the point, like, yes, she's absolutely right. She's absolutely right. And they will go as far as saying, some of these people will go as far as like, oh, those parents sell the children because they're starving. Those parents sell the children because they're poor, then can't feed them. And that is not true. That is absolutely not true. You will hear that over and over, as far as in Africa as well, where there are orphanages where they say, oh, they sold the child. No, the child was taken away, or they were under false pretenses that the child was going to be taken care of, because they couldn't care for them and they were allowed to visit them. And there's been so many stories of women, mothers, trying to find their children when they go visit them to this organization, this orphanage, according to them, that would help them find their or visit their child. And then they're not there, they're being sold. And I said sold, not adopted, because they were sold.
Yeah.
And
I mean,
the horrific.
It's horrific. I want to get that, because I kind of, there's lots of information, and I don't mean this rudely, but there's lots and lots of information out there on what's actually going on. I want to try and bring it back, because it's the average person that needs to start putting pressure on their governments. And I've heard it here since I've been back in England. It's like, oh, well, that's happening in America. That's not happening here. That's happening, that's Europe. That's not here. And every country seems to be doing this, in this delusion that it's not happening in their own countries. This is happening globally. I mean, you've got some statistics there of kids that have disappeared in the UK, have you not?
Yeah, it's in the UK alone. It's 70,000 go missing a year.
70,000
70,000. And out of those 70,000, only 116 were actually abducted by a parent. So that's a huge number that were abducted, not by, because they're like, oh, you have to go into statistics of like how many were runaways, how many were taken by their parents because of, divorce battles and stuff like that. That's only 116 of those kids that were adopted by a parent.
Out of 70,000.
Out of 70.
I want to keep repeating that. 70,000 for the listener. So to say, oh, that's in America, it's not true. That is just the UK. France is another huge amount. Italy is another huge amount. Spain is another huge amount. I think the other thing that we need to address within this is the organized crime, because this is part of organized crime. I mean, this is now actually up to or taken over the drugs trade, hasn't it? Slavery is up to and overtaken the drugs trade, and this is organized crime. And I when we were talking the weekend, when we were discussing this, and I was, highly emotional with anger And I want to,
Yeah, so was I. Yeah.
and I want to stay away from that because it's not beneficial for anybody. But what actually came in afterwards for me was, for those of you that don't know, I lived in Spain for a while, and I was quite close to Benidorm and everybody in the UK knows where Benidorm is. And they have organized crime. They have allowed organized crime to basically take over the town of Benidorm. When you go there on holiday, you don't know it. It's all very controlled, unless you're out 3, 4, 5 o'clock in the morning, and then it's not so controlled. And it was interesting that a friend of mine, and it's related, but it's not related. A friend of mine was, and I kind of thought about this, and I did think, I can't say for sure. A friend of mine whose husband was in the police force and worked Benidorm. There was a few years ago where they sent in the police force from Alicante into Benidorm during the football. And I was watching it play out on TV, on the news and everything. I'm thinking, what's going on? Because you could see that the football supporters, the British football supporters, they were okay. They were loud and they'd had too much to drink, but they weren't being destructive or violent in any way, shape, or form. But the police went in really, really heavy. And I said to my girlfriend, or my dog walking girlfriend, I said, what was all that about? Because it didn't add up. And I think this is the thing. A lot of things, we sit in our homes, we watch the news and we think that doesn't add up, but then we don't question it further. And we need to start questioning it further, because what had actually happened in that instance is the organized crime had become unorganized and the police had lost total control. And there were so many corrupt police higher up. That force was unable to go in there because it would have been disadvantageous to them and their families. That is how deeply entrenched it was. And so they had to use the football as an excuse to call in a force from a neighboring city to clean it up.
Oh my goodness.
Now that was she'd actually said to me, so that is fact. What came onto my spectrum and what spirit gave me, and I can't say for sure whether it was, but only a couple of weeks previous to that, a Spanish girl, a Spanish local girl, had disappeared on a Saturday night whilst out with her friends. And when we were having this conversation on Saturday, and then afterwards when I was thinking about it, my whole senses started going cha-ching, 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 because I can remember thinking at the time, that's an abduction. And I don't know why I thought that, but I often get messages from spirit that just drop in, and very often I'm right. I could never, there's rare occasions I can prove that when we have spiritual gifts, it's very difficult to prove it. But it made me think on Saturday how much of that was to clean up, how much had it got out of hand, because there's lots and lots of holiday makers that go there that disappear, which is never publicized, and they're young holiday makers.
As well as here, when you're saying that about the abduction, and then when I said that the majority that go missing are impoverished, don't let that fool you, because like you said, there are a lot of teens that are gone missing on a holiday in areas that you would think are perfectly normal and happy. Here, not too long ago, there was an abduction of a father and a teenager. She must have been like 15 at the time, and this was last year, I believe. Last year, they went to a basketball game in the US. They're both, this is a middle class family, and father, daughter, 15 years old, she goes off to the bathroom, never comes back. It takes about 10 days for them to know anything about what happened. The police didn't do anything. The government did nothing. The parents, however, got got onto their own devices to to find them, and they found one of these organizations that actually deals with human trafficking, and contacted that human trafficking organization to see if they can help. And within a couple of days, they were able to find out that yes, she is being trafficked.
But
15 years old.
this is the question, Sylvia, because this is what we need to be asking. And this is in this day and age, we live in a big brother society, especially in the UK. We've got the most cameras per population than anywhere in the world. So why can they not? It has to be, there has to be payoffs going on constantly for this to be occurring, and for it to be untraceable.
It's absolutely traceable, actually, and there is payoffs. Of course, there's payoffs. People pay off everything. What happened with this young lady, it was that she went to the bathroom. Somebody saw her go in, follow her to the bathroom, and then somehow lure her into following him. And then that was the last time they saw her, because that's all they got the cameras on. Now, this is where we as parents come in, especially that we think, oh, our teens know better. Actually, the majority that go missing are not little kids. Those little kids are actually being stolen from their parents, ripped from their parents' arms. So, but it's the majority are the ages between 11 and 17 are the ones that are being trafficked the most.
And they're being coerced by teenagers as well, aren't they?
And there's teenagers, and
yeah.
It's not just women, it's males as well. Just for instance, like I was telling you earlier, that Home Office in UK lost 116 Albanian teens that were under their care, and they were supposed to be dropped off at the hotel, and now they're missing.
They never arrived.
Where are they? Where are they? These are boys.
And nobody's investigating it. Nobody's taking.
No one's looking into this.
Responsibility. Nobody's taking action.
And we always talk about, okay, we need to, talk about like, oh, predators online, and we talk to our kids all the time, like, don't talk to strangers online, don't befriend strangers, don't meet anyone. Those are great, and we need to continue with that. But we also need to tell our teens, okay, just because a cute little guy is talking to you and tells you come over here, there's about 90% of the time there's an agenda to it. You're being fished in. Yeah. So that's exactly what happened with this young lady, and so many other ladies as well. That's just one of the many stories as well, that just so that you guys know that it's not just little kids. Little kids, of course, are the most heartbreaking as well. I mean, they're all heartbreaking, but it is so simple for you to lose your teen child because they were lied to, because they didn't know any better. And I think it's time that you sit down and tell them, like, that you need to be a part more of their lives. Or if you're going to meet someone, please let us know who it is. Don't just run off with someone because you never, and tell them this story. Sometimes it is necessary to scare them a little bit, to make them aware.
Yeah, I think you're quite right there. I think we namby-pamby our kids a little bit too much. And so they don't have I don't want people to live in doom and gloom and fear. Absolutely not, because that's not productive. But we also shouldn't be trying to paint the world like it's a wonderful, magical rainbow and everything's positive to our kids either, because it's not. And we're doing them an injustice because we're not equipping them to deal with what the real world is. And let's be honest, the real world at the moment is pretty awful. It's pretty awful to actually have to admit that now in the history of humanity, we have the biggest slave industry ever.
Yeah, and then no one's saying anything about it, and the governments are not saying. And actually, I think the governments are the ones playing the biggest part in it. They're the ones that keep missing.
And I think we need to get out of our armchairs. We need to stop watching the television and believing. And I think we need to, and the other thing that's really annoys me is every time something like this comes up, which is true, because I can remember the Epstein. I mean, Sylvia knows my history, but I had a lady come to me for assistance regarding a whole Epstein scenario about 3 or 4 years before Epstein was caught, and she wanted some help. I was completely blown out the water because it's not something I kind of dealt with, and I'd only really just started kind of opening up to my spirituality, and it scared me. I'm going to be honest, it did scare me at the time. It did scare me. I was just like, whoa, what's this? And that I regret to say that at the time I actually was like, okay, I don't want to get involved with this. I don't want to get involved with this. And yet the things that she'd actually kind of put on my radar was absolutely true. We were to discover 3-4 years later. And I think this is the thing is I get that I don't want to get involved with this because it is dark, it is heavy, it is scary. We don't have to go so deep, but we do have to go deep enough that we actually start demanding answers from our government. We start demanding that our kids are able to play safely in the streets. We need to start bringing back the community where we look out for each other and look out for each other's children. We have to stop it's interesting, isn't it? Because this whole thing about keeping your kids in, putting them in the back garden, letting them play video games because it's safer than going to the park. But actually, the problem's now bigger because nobody knows anybody else. Parents don't know parents. The people that don't have their children are grown up, don't know the kids because they're never outdoors playing. This keeping them in and keeping them safe is actually contrary. When they were out in the streets and everybody knew them and they knew their routines, that's what kept them safe because everybody in the street would become a parent. Everybody would know who does what, when, how they play, what their name is, who is normal in that group and who isn't. Now we don't have those perimeters.
Yes, in Japan, they actually have that culture where kids are allowed to play outside, as well as Sweden, allowed to play outside and have a routine, and they have a routine of where they go home. I actually even tell my kids, please stay on main streets because they can easily see you. Don't take shortcuts. I know it's shorter and faster, but sometimes it's not the safest way. I constantly tell them like, okay, don't do this. Look out for, don't be on your phones. Please don't put your headsets because you never know who's going to come behind you. Be aware of your surroundings. And I actually obviously track them myself. So as soon as they leave the school, I'm tracking them. And I kind of estimate if they're not within the house within a certain time, then I go outside and looking for them just to make sure they're. Sometimes, of course, kids are kids and they stay and they meet a friend and they start chit-chatting. But overall, even that is when we look into the statistics of Japan, they don't share those statistics. So we don't really have a number. They have an estimated number of the past 10 years, or past 5 years, sorry, with 10,000 missing children. Some of them are being abducted by their parents in divorce battles. In Sweden, just alone, 900 children were just missing that are trafficked this past year. 900 trafficked that they know of, migrant children. So this is happening, and as well,
those numbers are significantly lower, aren't they? If they can be trusted, it's because it's that see, it's the breakdown of the community that I feel is a massive key factor in this.
Absolutely.
We've got a breakdown in morals. We've got an absolute definite moral issue going on within society globally. within humanity. It's a self-serving, self-gratifying mentality that we've actually inbred, and so much so that it's almost like people believe it's their right, with absolute no concern or consideration or compassion for how that is affecting another person or the community or the country or the world. I mean, or
Yeah.
humanity. I mean, it's just that self-gratification. So we've got that moral dilemma going on that we've actually bred, that we need to open our eyes to and take responsibility for. But also, we, in the guise of trying to protect our children, have inadvertently broken down the dynamics of the community and the village raising your children.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And that is the fastest way to break down a society. If you really want to destroy a society and make them all follow government, and I'm not just saying because I'm going to be anti-government or conspiracy theory, anything like that, but if you want them all to just obey in a sense of not knowing distrust and have the government has more power over you, I would say that sure, divide and conquer. And again, that is one of the things a society to break down is not to know who we are. Take away the the relationships, the communities, and then they become strangers. It's so easy to attack a stranger and to attack a friend, a neighbor, or someone you know.
Yeah.
So when something goes down as political or something goes down as this right now, the trafficking, oh, that's not none of my business because my kids are safe, or I don't have any kids, or I have nothing to say or contribute. This is why I don't have any kids. It's so easy for us adults to say that because it doesn't affect us directly, because we're not part of that community. But I bet you that if you lived in a community where you constantly saw children and you befriended the children and you saw them, and then one of them goes off with a stranger that you've never seen before, you know that that child does not belong with that child. You're going to run and say, hey, 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 hold on, what's going on here?
Yeah.
If you don't know that child, you're going to think that's the father or the cousin, or even if it's another little kid. Who is this little kid?
There was that YouTube video that I sent you that I still feel is suspicious. That he found a little boy on the beach that had been missing for 2 weeks, and instead of, if you believe the video to be true, instead of phoning the police straight away, they actually played with him, and then they took him to the cinema, and then they did this, and then eventually you see a scene where the police arrive, and I'm kind of like, for me, alarm bells are ringing there all over the place.
Yeah.
Because if I see a child that's lost, the first thing I would actually do is, one, get another adult, so I'm not there on my own in that sense. So I will take myself, so if it was in a secluded place, I would take myself and that child to a public place so that we're visible, and then find call the police. Ask the child if they know where they live. Try and get as much information off as you can, and and call the police. You don't play with a child for X amount of hours and then take them to the cinema, and then, I mean, it just doesn't make sense. And then there was another video from that same incident, from that same little boy and a young man, where, as a young man, he drove up to the school and pretended to be his father and took him out of school early, and then was like, oh, why, the parents have put a court order on me. Well, yeah, of course they put a court order, but this is what we're saying. If we had that community, if we knew our neighbors, if we socialized, even if it was just to know their name and say hello and kind of have an idea of their, and it's not being nosy, it's being neighborly. And I think this is the problem, is we've all been brought up to say, oh, well, they're ever so nosy, they always know when I'm coming in and out, blah blah blah. And I've been guilty of it, we've all been guilty of it, but it's called being neighborly, it's called being part of a community. And had I mean, I'm still with that video. I'm still kind of like, incredulous, because why did the teacher not know who that child's father was?
Exactly. That's the trouble, and in the fact that they recorded this, and that's the society we live in right now, and that needs to change because, again, for for instance, in Sweden, they're allowed to leave by themselves, right? And to me, that's always been like, how do they have that authority to leave by themselves when they're children, or just take off? And anybody can go into the schools, anybody can go in. I don't know how many times I have actually gone into a school and no one asked me, are you a parent, are you a teacher, whatever,
Mhm.
um
But they shouldn't. I know we live in a time now where it is needed, but I'd rather see it go back to a time where it isn't needed. I'd rather see that the work is put in
no,
so
but they
that we
wouldn't
can,
even ask me. And this
yeah.
is when we just recently arrived. They don't know who I am, they don't know who my children are. I just
Mhm.
went in looking for them, and everyone's just like looking like, okay, hi. And I think they're so scared of confrontations, and they're scared of making someone feel out of place or unwelcomed, that they allow this. And that's the part where I don't apologize for, because if I see that a parent does, or if I see an adult doesn't belong there, I will go, it's like, hey, what's your name, what are you doing, who are you looking for?
Yeah,
Okay,
yeah,
that is not me being suspicious. And if they take it that way, that's on them.
that's on
Because
them.
I've
Yeah.
always said that I would rather apologize to an adult for insulting them than to live the rest of with my life knowing that I failed a
Mhm.
child.
And also,
So,
if you're being, let's be honest, why would you be insulted if you if you're a mother or a father and you're not the person that usually picks up your children, and then one day you pick up your child because you can, because you're not working, for instance, because that is
mhm,
the case scenario. Sometimes children are picked up by nannies or grandparents, or you know, one, it's usually mum that picks up and dad's never picked up, or dad picks up and mum's never picked up. So if you're the parent that isn't habitually there and you're questioned, why would you be offended? I'd be
mhm.
pleased. I'd feel that would give me a greater sense of security. And so if you're offended, you need to be questioning why you're offended. What is going on there?
Yeah. Well, unfortunately, there are some parents that are offended, but like you said, that's a me problem, or you problem, actually, not a you me, but you problem. Um, but those are things that we need to take in consideration, when it comes to being aware of. It's just not being afraid to ask, because, like I said, it's better for you to insult or say sorry to an adult because you were protecting a child than to assume that the child belongs to that adult, and then realizing that wasn't the case, you could have done something about it and live with that guilt.
Mhm.
Because it has happened so many times, like, oh, I assumed that was an uncle, oh, I assumed that was a cousin, so I didn't say anything. Yes, I saw them together, but I just assumed because the child went willingly. And the way they're masters at this, they know how to get lure children in. I mean,
Mhm.
we're not talking about the minivan anymore with the doggies and the
Oh,
puppies
it's
anymore, and
very
it's
sophisticated
so
psychology.
sophisticated.
Yeah.
If they have learned how to get to children with them going willingly, just like I
Mhm.
said with this young lady, 15 years old, obviously very well educated, comes from a middle class US, went to a basketball game with her
Mhm.
father that has done so many times and was lured out.
Mhm.
That's how advanced they work now. So we need to talk to our children about that. And if you think like, well, I can't talk to my children because it's so dark and I don't want to disrupt their childhood, their innocence, don't think for a second that those creeps that are out there won't do it for you. They
Mhm.
will talk to them, they will get to them. So
Mhm.
make sure that you get to your children first and talk to them and walk them what to do in those events ever happened, because those other ones out there that are trying to get to your children, they will not hold anything back.
Mhm.
They will show them things, they will talk to them about things that you can't even imagine.
Yeah.
And make sure that you are the one that your children are aware of surroundings, like ingrained them, like, okay, make sure that you don't talk to strangers, and don't be afraid to be rude. My daughter once told me, like, why do I want to be rude? And I was like, I don't care. If an adult says hello, just keep walking, ignore them.
Yeah.
And I always say, like, pretend you have your headsets on. Don't actually have them on, because you need to make sure what's going around. Don't have music around, but it's a good device, because if you don't like someone's talking to you, or usually males talking to you, you can ignore it.
Yeah.
Like if you have your headsets.
Yeah.
So it's okay to be ignored, and don't ever give directions. First of all, like, because she's obviously a teenager, so I'm like, somebody needs directions, tell them to Google it. Who in the world does not have a phone now that can have a GPS? That's don't fall for
See,
that.
I'm listening to you, and I know this is really, really good advice. It's very, very important advice, but my whole body is cringing because we shouldn't be living like this. It is so
Unfortunately, that's the life we live now.
yeah, but Sylvia, this is what we need to start to change. We need to, I don't have all the answers. I truly don't. But I think the average person in the street starts to need to actually create workshops and start devising plans that in each community we actually come up with solutions, and then we force through the power of our voices and our voting to push that onto government so that they take action. They take action that we want. I think this is the biggest problem that we've got in society, is we've forgotten that we actually have the power. And I've said this in other podcasts. We have the power. We have been pushed through a funnel that has us believing that, oh, well, that's society, and oh, that is how it is, and oh, things are never changed. No, they're never going to change unless we actually stand up together, but not stand up and protest, because there is an aspect of this that, and again, you're going to say conspiracy theorists, and to be honest, I really don't, at this point, I don't give a shit. If you want to call me that, that's absolutely fine. I've had enough of this. This has been going on for years. I've said things and thought things for many, many years, and it's just getting worse. It's not getting any better. And the predictions that I've made have actually, unfortunately, come into fruition. We need to start to be heard. We need to start talking with our feet and talking with our votes, and we need to stop this, oh, well, nothing will ever change, because nothing will ever change. What we don't want is, we don't want to live in anger, live in fear, and then for that to boil up like a volcano exploding, and we take to the streets, and then the government, because this is a lot of what's going on, and then the government, our government, the British government, the French governments, we've seen it, France at the moment, Spanish, Portuguese, Italian, Dutch, German, globally, America, where we take to the streets, and then they call it anarchy, and they bring in martial law, because that's what they want. Because with martial law, they can do whatever they want. Whatever they want. We then get no say. And so we need to be very clever, very mindful about how we do this, but we do need to start creating change. We do need to start putting up task forces in each community and sorting out our social issues, because our governments aren't going to do it for us. It's not advantageous for them. It doesn't fill their pockets with a wad of money in 3 houses that they don't even need.
That's very true. Unfortunately, it has come down to that. When you were saying all that, I think that the best thing is that voting will be a key. Voting the right personnel into government, as well as donating our time if you can, or our money if you can't, or to organizations that actually make a difference. There's as well as demanding for better laws for human trafficking. Right now, anybody caught under human trafficking, or the penalty is only 3 years. 3 years is nothing.
Yeah. Well, we had this conversation, didn't we? Because you, in the UK, I know of somebody who was drink driving, which is wrong. And they got 20 years because they in that whilst driving that car in that drunken state, they killed somebody accidentally. They didn't have that intention. Was it an accident because they were under the influence behind the wheel? No, it wasn't an accident, but they didn't mentally. And I think this is where we need to start really unpacking our laws, because they didn't mentally get in that car thinking, I'm going to kill somebody now. The fact that they've been drinking put them in a position that was a huge probability. And so, yes, they are culpable of that. But they didn't have that mental intention, whereas a child molester, a child abductor, a trafficker has that intention, and they only get 3 years. Is a life. How are we allowing our governments and our jurisdictional, I can't say that word, our laws to govern whose life is more valuable than another? I don't understand it.
That, to me, I will never understand that. Even rape, it doesn't you don't get as much sentencing as you do for other behaviors that are, like you said. I mean, they're still like, you understand that, but that's a life. That life will never be the same again. That life is done, dead. It's a walking shell sometimes. And being trafficked, and the amount of people that you have destroyed, you should be in the same line as a serial killer. You should easily be have the penalty equally to those of the serial killers, because you have committed numerous murders, even if you are still alive, even if they're still alive. And those that are still alive, because they will never know which ones, how many. They probably don't even know themselves. So anyone that is connected to that, even a bystander who sees it and knows about it and just doesn't say anything because they get a cut from that and it's proven, they should also be penalized for participating in that, because it goes a long way. And they need to do a huge investigation in everybody in law enforcement, in their computers and in their own personal computers, because if you only knew how many of these people in police officers that have now been caught with numerous of child pornography, they need to have access to that. So if you work in government, you should be able to forfeit all your rights so that they can know what you're doing, because Absolutely. It's kind of
well, we had that incident in the UK over, I mean, it wasn't over a topic so serious, but it was over them having a party over Christmas with COVID, when everybody else was in lockdown. But even then, they tried to block. I don't watch mainstream news, so I'm not sure what the outcome was, but they tried to block the courts from having access to their telephone conversations over that period. I mean, how dare they? They work for us.
Yeah, exactly.
If this is an investigation because people are outraged, then an investigation takes place, and they do not have the right to not allow those telephones to be available. It's the one thing when you were talking, and the last thing, because we need to finish up because this has got really long, is the one thing that I do want to say, and I know people aren't going to be very happy with me here, but I think you need to seriously consider it, and I think you need to take responsibility for it as well, which is why people aren't going to be happy, is average Joe blogs, normal, happy 2.4 children still watch pornography. Many, in fact, most of those films are from people that have been trafficked. Even if kids is not your thing, even if young girls is not your thing, the biggest percentage, even when they do a little clip at the beginning to say, oh, yes, I do this freely because I enjoy it, blah, 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 because I've no, they put all sorts of tricks in there to make you believe that these women, these men, these that that they are participating willingly. Very few of
Mm-hmm.
those videos are they participating willingly.
Mm-hmm. True. That's a very true. Glad you brought that up as
And if you
well. But
take away the demand, you take away the finance.
mm-hmm. Well, it's all about supply and demand. That's the sad part.
Mm-hmm.
That's really the sad part, because none of this would happen if the demand wasn't there, which
No.
is a sickening idea. And that's kind of where I would let that grain into everyone. The fact that the demand is so high that there is a market for this and people will fill that market.
Mm-hmm.
They don't care about human trafficking. They don't care about drugs. They don't care about it. They care about where the money's coming. If the demand was on righteous thing, those people will do in the righteous thing, because that's where the demand is.
Yes.
That's where the
Yeah.
money is.
Yeah.
It's not about that. It's the fact that the demand is there.
Yeah.
That's the sickening part. So it's focusing not on the traffickers, but on the people that are demanding this, going after the people that are demanding this as well. Like, my God, I just want to bring this before we end this podcast is I want you guys to, next time when you fly to Thailand, Cambodia, Mexico, parts of Africa, Vietnam, I want you to look at your surroundings and I want you to see who's actually traveling. You'll be surprised at what you see, because I have done these routes and it sickens me every freaking time when I see the majority of the passengers are not families.
Mm-hmm.
So I'll leave you with that, and that comes from, I've traveled from the US, I've traveled from Europe, I traveled from Japan, and I've traveled from Sweden. And I live in Sweden, so I'm going to say the times that I had to fly to Guam from Sweden via Japan through Bangkok, it was my family, maybe two other families, and the rest were middle-aged males between 40 and 70. That's all I have to say. I know they're not going there for whatever, all the way to Bangkok for a day.
We have to
I know
really
there's
look
family.
at our demand,
I
don't
know.
we? We have to
Yep.
look at, we have to step back, we have to realize that actually this is not just a bit of titivation, this is not just a little bit of gratification, this is not a little bit of excitement injection into your married life. This is hurting people, it's killing people, it's hurting
Absolutely.
children, it's killing children. And I think we'll leave it at that.
Mm-hmm.
That's bye-bye from me.
And me. And as always, don't forget to subscribe, like, and share. Till next time.
Thank you for listening to today's episode. If you haven't already subscribed, please do so, and please leave a review, as it helps us grow and bridge the gap between the sexes. If you have any topics you would like us to cover, shoot us an email. Until next time, go out and practice putting all your cards on the table with no judgment, expectations, and fear.